I think it was a dog at first, because the proportions of like a dog snout versus a cat
Huh.
snout on that would make sense. And all that research I've been doing, like Anubis is like the oldest Egyptian god. Like
Uh-huh.
he's
I'm assuming it's as old as the Egyptologists say it is, or else.
that's kind of where I'm at.
The end of the 10-day in 2014, we found the chopper, yeah.
Which is a big rock that had mammoth blood on it that was used to smash mammoth bones. And then, yeah, the next few years didn't find much. Well, we found the Clovis Point. I guess that's pretty big.
That's something.
Yeah. And there were some dogs out there too,
Yeah, a ton of dogs.
and they ate people's shit.
They eat people's feces. A lot.
Yeah. Do you wanna elaborate on that or?
Sure. If you want to find evidence for dogs in a Pleistocene campsite, you should probably just start digging holes like out in the middle of nowhere away from the campsite.
Just cross your
And
fingers.
just cross your fingers that you're going to find like a rib that's been gnawed on or something like
Yeah.
that, because you're certainly not going to find any evidence for it inside of a house. No, and most of the time they were just kind of like out in the woods doing stuff.
I'm here for the second episode with Dr. Spencer Pelton. I think you've been a friend of mine for 10 years now.
Oh man, is it that long?
When I got here in 2014, so I guess 8 years.
We're going on a decade.
Damn,
Feels like a decade.
pretty crazy. Spencer is from Sevierville, Tennessee. I'll let him talk about that, but he is currently the state archaeologist of Wyoming. It's one of the coolest jobs I think there is in archaeology. So, yeah, you want to tell us where you're from?
I'm from Sevierville, Tennessee. That's the hometown of Dolly Parton, most famously. Hopefully, will also be known as the hometown of Spencer Pelton someday. What I like a lot of Tennesseans before me, I left home and came west to tame the wilds of this frontier we have in the United States, and now I live in Wyoming and I love it.
Hell yeah. You used to wrestle with bears as a kid, right?
Yeah, did a lot of wrestling. My father is a wildlife biologist, so from a pretty young age I was involved with his research projects, mainly going into bear dens in the winter and tagging female bears and playing with bear cubs. Worked one summer trapping bears in the Smokies, caught 69 bears.
Good number.
Great number.
So we were sitting on my bus roof this summer with a guy named Rado. He's Slovakian, and he just decided not to sleep in a tent and just slept outside in the open, and then said he was going to go hang out with bears in Yellowstone. But we were talking about bears, and you were saying that they were kind of similar to dogs in a way.
I think they're similar in that they're really easy to anthropomorphize, right? They're super smart, and kind of like how we anthropomorphize dogs and we give them cute names and we narrate their thoughts. Bears are a lot like that. Like when you interact with a bear face to face, they have a lot of human-like behavioral tendencies that makes you extraordinarily empathetic to them as animals. I would say a lot more so than other animals. You can tell when they're upset, you can tell when they're angry. They have a sense of play and a sense of humor, seemingly. But yeah, I'd say that they're extraordinarily intelligent. I mean, my dad always used to say they're basically second to the great apes in intelligence. So
Yeah.
So when you're around them, it really feels like you're interacting with a human-like thing. I think well, a lot of Native American cultures, bears feature super prominently in their mythologies, and I have to think that it has something to do with that. Like I remember Cherokee saying that they thought bears were like incarnations of ancestors or something along those lines. I think a lot of Native American cultures have similar beliefs, but you can see how that would end up being the case.
I had to do a lot of research on bears when I was working at my last job because it was just bare bone after bare bone coming out of the creation boxes. And I had to research it because, like, obviously they're doing something with the bears. And it was probably for the bear grease. And it was I can't say that. We'll bleep it out. It was one of those mounds. And they, were mass processing bear fat. But I looked into some mythologies. And, yeah, bears are, like, when the animals convene to discuss the affairs of humans, bears are the ones that like call the meetings, and they're like, "Hey guys, like,
There's like chairman of the board.
yeah." And I think the one story, the one story I read too is like they figured out the bow and arrow, so like we're gonna die real quick, so we need to trick them somehow or something like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and they would dip babies in bear oil like as soon as they were born, like
Huh.
pop them out and.
Yeah, and if you ever see a hairless bear, which it happens sometimes, they get basically mange. They look weirdly human-like, just in the proportions of their appendages and stuff, and also their hind limb footprints look a lot like human footprints. So it's not a lot of like Bigfoot myths come from big hind limbs of bears, basically, because they look superhuman.
Huh. The meat eater guys, or the one guy I did the interview with, Clay Newcomb from Bear Grease, said that when you skin a bear, it looks pretty much like a human.
Yeah.
And so when they would put those pictures on Instagram, they got flagged all the time for being like human remains.
Oh,
But
crazy.
yeah, but usually if you're skinning something and you show guts, it like puts a little sensitivity thing over it so you can not just scroll through your feed. But I see half naked women as soon as I open Instagram anyway, so I don't get the point. So anyway, man, yeah, you went to MTSU, which is Middle Tennessee State University. You usually went for music.
Yeah, I went in originally for recording industry, and I mean, basically that was 2004, 2005. It was right when streaming music and like I don't know, pirating downloads and stuff was taking off.
LimeWire.
So the writing was kind of on the wall for the music industry. They had a good run, right? Like in the 90s into the early 2000s, slinging CDs had to have been hugely profitable business. And then as soon as music became digital, not so much anymore. So yeah, I decided to find something else, and I always had a passion for science growing up in kind of the surroundings I did. So decided to go more that direction.
Yeah. It just dawned on me too that like I used to have to download stuff on iTunes, like each individual song, and I was like, oh hell yeah. I have probably like $1,000 worth of music on a hard drive somewhere. Now you can just like search it.
I have probably $5,000 worth of CDs in storage right now, and it's just phenomenal the amount of money that was wasted on that crap.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's such an ephemeral medium. I mean, it's like you can only play them so many times, they go away. But yeah, same with digital music. When you still had to pay for it by the song and stuff, it's like, how did they really think we were going to keep track of those files for our entire lives? Probably not. No.
Yeah.
They knew what they're doing.
So they're kind of like an obsolete technology in a way. I mean, you still use them for certain things. Like we had to use them at the Army Corps for like data storage. But being a state arc, like when does something become an artifact? Like are CDs artifacts now?
Not quite.
Okay.
You know, conventional wisdom is 50 years, right? But I actually learned recently, and this is great. I've been tossing this around to everybody. It's actually 100 years under ARPA.
Okay.
If you want to get in the nuts and bolts of heritage management, we can do that, but it's pretty boring. But yeah, it's 100 years for actual artifacts, 50 years for something to be a historic property, like a historic archaeological site or something like that. But the difference between the artifacts and the historic property is kind of like some pretty nuanced shit with heritage management law. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so 100 I always heard 50. Which means like VHS tapes kind of are like literal artifacts now.
Closing in on, I mean, a lot of vinyl records certainly are.
There's a bunch up there. But by the way, this is not my house or Spencer's house. I'm squatting in my friend's house in Laramie, Wyoming right now while it's snowing outside. Irrelevant detail. So the state arc job you have, you told me it's your favorite job you've ever had. What exactly do you do for people who don't like understand like state or federal archaeology type stuff?
State archaeologists differ in every state. There's 50 of us. We're 52 plus Puerto Rico and Guam. In some states they have like a more of a compliance role where you enforce laws and you deal with permitting, things like that. Some states are attached to museums, so you'd be like a museum director. This state, the focus is really on research, publication, public outreach, and education. And then recently they've tacked on the recovery of archaeological human remains from private and state lands in the state. So that boils down to a few major things. We manage the only repository in the state of Wyoming where artifacts turn up. Teach a class at the university and serve on graduate student committees as an adjunct faculty member. I recover archaeological human remains when they pop up, usually during like home renovations and things like that. And
you get any like John Wayne Gacy situations?
Probably not. But there's been weird cases pop up where it's like, is this really archaeological or not? But certainly nothing within the past several decades. Although I did get called into a forensic investigation a couple weeks ago that I helped out with.
Yeah. Cool. And you get to do, well, I guess for the people who don't know, I mean, I talk about Wyoming all the time. I would say it's like upper, like, I wouldn't say Ivy League of prehistoric archaeology, but I know most people that come out of Wyoming do some good work, and we have really good professors there. But that being said, Wyoming itself, just the state, is like the Jurassic Park of archaeology, because you got, Clovis to now, so you got cowboy stuff, and like in Guernsey I found an archaic point next to like a belt buckle from some rancher that lived there probably 100 years ago. Spent the night in the cave, either lost or drunk.
Yeah, why do you think that is? I mean, I there certainly wasn't a ton of people living in Wyoming ever, because it's literally one of the worst places in the world to live as a forager.
It's cold as fuck, dude.
So I talk about this all the time. I think ultimately what it is there's not a lot of people living here now, so there's a ton of accessibility to land, and a lot of land is still pretty much untouched by modern development. So there's just less disturbance in general.
Yeah.
And then combine that with like a super arid environment where things preserve really well, and also vegetation doesn't grow a ton. You just see it a lot better. I think it's kind of that I don't really think there's anything special about Wyoming in terms of the actual behavior of the people that created this record that just made more artifacts. I think it's just a function of discoverability and preservation more than anything.
Right. Like we find way more Clovis points out east, or Paleoindian points, because it's all developed and people find stuff all the time, versus out here where I'd say 90% of the state hasn't had a hole dug in it yet.
Yeah, right. And like, we have we have basically 10 Clovis points, and I know where every one of them came from. So
it's pretty funny. And so you get to do a bunch of research then, right? Like a lot of state archaeology is pretty bureaucratic and kind of a political position, but you seem to really like going out, and because we worked all summer together.
Yeah, we do. I mean, the entire summer, basically. The earlier we can get out, the better in the spring. So try to start doing field work at the end of April, if possible. And then keep doing it until the snow flies. Today, this is like the first snow we've had, and I still got to go out and backfill a site that I excavated a couple weeks ago.
Oh, damn.
but yeah, we try to do as much research as possible, and importantly, we try to do research that the public in Wyoming can engage with. That's a big part of our mandate, is to make sure that people in Wyoming love archaeology and that they have a chance to be active participants in the process. So I get invested in kind of a combination of high level kind of rigorous research with the university, but also doing some more kind of publicly accessible excavations that a lot of people can participate in and enjoy and find a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Because as you know, LaPrele until last year was not a very fun site to work on. You found very little stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not really ideal from a volunteer perspective, because you can tell them all day long, no, seriously, this is cool. It's gonna look really cool once we get it on a map, but it doesn't really matter if you're not finding shit. So
yeah. Right. And yeah, that soil or that sediment, dude, it like my carpal tunnel's still going from the summer, just digging that stuff, because it's, what is it, calcium carbonate just caked in by the sun.
I think it's a bunch of stuff. LaPrele is a really old site. It's like the oldest site in the state now. So
that's cool.
The dirt's super old, so it has a ton of minerals built up in it, but also it's been sitting underneath 10 feet of dirt since 10,000 years ago, and that weight just compresses things.
Yeah,
makes the dirt super hard. So it's a notably difficult site to excavate.
Damn. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I guess, yeah, to what he's saying, like There was the mammoth that they found in the 70s or the
80s.
80s, and then like a chert flake, I think. And then when we went back a few years ago, or started this, 2014, they found the chopper. Or is that 2015?
2014, the end of the 10-day in 2014, we found the chopper, yeah.
Okay, so which is
Rich Adams found it.
Right. Which is a big rock that had mammoth blood on it that was used to smash mammoth bones or whatever. And then, yeah, the next few years, the 2 years that I worked there, was it 15, 16, and 17? Didn't find much. We found the Clovis Point. I guess that's pretty big.
That's something.
Yeah. And it was an undergrad who dug. It was like one of those purgatory trenches we dug, where you just went to put in some test units, and then you guys know Connor from the other podcast, but he was digging this unit and brought it down like I think a few levels, and then he left to go back to work, and the next person who dug it found a Clovis Point, and he was genuinely upset about that.
Yeah, like immediately on a shovel.
Yeah.
She was shoveling the unit down.
Shoveled a Clovis Point. Yeah. Pretty big stuff. And then now, yeah, this past year, dude, it was insane. And like, this is a good segue into your research, but like scraper after scraper and biface after biface coming out of it. It was like a full-on processing camp, right?
Seemingly. I mean, we haven't really, or Todd is the one that does all this. He hasn't really like processed all the data, but yeah, I mean, we got probably 50 inscrapers out of this one concentration, in addition to some preforms, a fluted point, channel flakes. So yeah, basically everything that a hunter-gatherer living at that time would have been doing was being done in that house, making weaponry, scraping hides, sewing clothing. We got bone needles out of there. We got a couple gravers suggesting they were perforating hide or something like that. Red ochre suggesting they were staining something, probably hide as well. A ton of bone, processed ivory. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I haven't quite wrapped my head around it, honestly. It's basically one of the richest Clovis assemblages, or I guess we should say fluted point assemblages that has been discovered.
Yeah, and like I've been overseas and I've seen some archaeological sites, but they weren't Paleolithic. And like just seeing, like especially going through all the footage the other day, like I was trying to edit all that B-roll I took, I was like, holy shit, we found so much stuff, and it's like a full-blown Paleolithic culture, just like in Wyoming, tanning hides in the Ice Age, just chilling, sitting there next to a dead mammoth.
That's a good way to put it, for sure.
Yeah.
And I remember saying this summer, like, I mean, I've dug a ton of sites, and the amount of stuff we got out of that would have been impressive from a site that was, 500 years old. And this is one that's, 13,000 years old.
Yeah.
It was pretty remarkable. We feel pretty lucky I mean, I guess we're not lucky. We were pretty damn hard to find that.
Yeah.
We didn't find that concentration of artifacts till year, 7, basically. So it took a while to get there, but.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, like I got to just be there and squat for free all summer, but like the footage I got is insane, because I don't think any stock footage company or documentary company is really going to find an assemblage that fucking cool just emerging from the ground. Also, what's the other site we did? Warren. Just, I don't know, just seeing a mammoth just like come out of the ground like throughout the day was like pretty, I've never seen anything like that.
You're going to start, cool. What's that? Imgur?
The old site?
Is that the stock footage? Who's the company?
Oh, Storyblocks.
I don't know. There's all those companies that put their watermarks on images. You need to start like putting a watermark of your face over all your images.
Storyblocks and Getty Images. Yeah.
Getty. Yeah. Getty's what I was trying to think of.
I know. I might start trying to send it to him, because like every like stock footage website, it's just some like old British dude looking at a piece of pottery and like brushing it, or like some dude in a lab, and I'm like, nah, that's not how it works. And that's something too. Like, it's hard to make prehistoric archaeology look sexy. I watched that Yellowstone documentary, why was it called Greater Yellowstone? And they're talking about Wyoming, like Douglas, I don't know. But anyway, the stuff that they were filming, like I saw they got a nice shot of like the water screen, and like, but there's no like sexy like statues or phallic carved objects that come out of the ground that are cool to look at, like it's hard to look at stone tools and be like, nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the fundamental difficulty of interpreting hunter-gatherer archaeology in general, it was always funny. Like we'd go on these as a master's student, we would go on all these epic road trips to and from conferences, and my advisor at CSU, Jason LaBelle, would always take us to these archaeological sites here and there and like talk about it and what happened there, that kind of thing. And we were all super into it. It's an amazing opportunity, but to the general public, interpreting hunter-gatherer archaeology is just basically standing in a field and saying like, trust me, something cool happened here one time. Just listen to me. I know.
Yeah.
But it's kind of it's a remarkable hunter-gatherer archaeological site that you could actually interpret well and has cool stuff to look at and really makes you feel like you're immersed in, you know, the time during which it happened. So like the Boar site is a good example of a place that does that well, because they have this massive pile of bison bone. It's all exposed and you can see it and you can see the enormity of like what happened there. But it's kind of rare to have that in the hunter-gatherer archaeological record. It's not like Mesa Verde. They have the benefit of really cool architecture and stuff.
Yeah, so sites here in the States, it's like you kind of just have to have like a mental image of what it looked like, and it's hard to make it look sexy, you know, to people, or have them like picture it, because it's not a pyramid. And
yeah, we're just working with the remains of hunter gatherers. It's just, yeah, you have to use your imagination a lot unless you have some kind of recreation of what happened there.
Yeah.
Although, you know, certain artifacts tell really good stories, so that's why people love like giant pieces of weaponry and stuff, and bone needles, stuff like that. That really, you see them and they really tell an interesting story, and you can really immediately be struck by what it was used for, that it was held in somebody's hand, and that it was, you know, created a really long time ago.
Do you think AR or VR or something like that will help archaeology a lot? I wonder this sometimes, because you could put on like a headset, say at LaPrele, and like see the entire camp. But
I know people are experimenting with that a lot, like especially at like Park Service sites and stuff, to interpret, mainly for interpretation. So it's just kind of an augmented like tour of a historic site.
like Pokemon Go.
Like, yeah, I guess.
Little Squirtle pops up on accident. Yeah.
I mean, I could see that being useful. I don't know if I would be into it, but the kids probably would be. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's just like, I have a million ways I could animate, or like ideas to animate something to explain like how, you know, deposition works, or like what these yurts would have looked like, or, you know, structures, but just so much time in the day, I can't like draw it all and like make it look good and stuff and outsource it. But that kind of stuff would be cool. But of course, you'd have to get actors to play those, I guess, Paleoindians, or you just CGI them or something like Smeagol.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess in the end, the thing that sells archaeology in my mind is coming into contact with the actual physical remains of really ancient people.
Yeah.
Whether that be ruins or artifacts or mounds or whatever. And when everything's translated into like an augmented reality format, you completely lose that by nature of the technology. And I just don't know if you can ever truly like capture the feeling of interacting physically with something really ancient through augmented reality. I think it's useful for just educational purposes solely, but in terms of, I don't know, a replacement for like the awe-inspiring moment you have when you like hold a Clovis point or step inside the ruins at Mesa Verde or whatever. I don't know if you could ever really replace that.
What do you think that is?
I don't know. I really don't know, but I don't think it's unique to our modern times. I feel like probably people for all time have been really awe-inspired by old stuff. But yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. He's like picking up a point someone made that's modern, like touching stone tools. I'm like, man, that's cool. Because, like, I know how much work and patience goes into making that and how hard it is. And, like, it's kind of like an art form. But then to hold, like, an ancient one, and you're like, man, it was, like, cold as fuck out here, and there's short-faced bears, and this guy managed to get this out. And that's cool to me. But something even older, like a Chilean hand axe and stuff, like, surely somebody in ancient Neolithic China, picked up a hand axe and was like, damn, this is cool.
It's probably because it's kind of a form of time travel in a way.
Yeah.
Because, we share the same brain with all of our ancestors going back, 2 million years that made all these stone tools. And so we kind of get why somebody would make something like that the way they did. Because we've been making it that way for a couple million years, like a hand axe. And so in that way, you can pick up something that's 2 million years old, and you can kind of understand, kind of have a psychic connection with somebody that lived 2 million years ago and understand the decisions they made and why they did what they did, and feel some kind of kinship with something that's been dead for, thousands, if not millions of years, which is a pretty powerful experience. Same thing with like walking into ruins at Mesa Verde or whatever. It's you can understand why they constructed it in that way, why they put a window there and not there.
Mm.
I think that's why like some of the huge ruins, like the pyramids of Giza and stuff, inspires so much wonky shit. It's because we don't really I don't really understand why you would do that.
Yeah.
It just seems like out of character for the human lineage almost. It's so massive and just impractical. But
yeah, and it's like all that work that there's just no like videotape evidence of it happening, so there's like a million different ways you could a lot
of stories you could tell.
Yeah, because I can't build a pyramid right now. I guess they took like 300 years to build and shit. Have you seen that stuff about the Sphinx, where it's like there's water erosion on it that's like 12,000 years old?
Yeah, I've read I've read the initial papers on that, and then also the rebuttals to it.
What do you think?
Well, the rebuttal is that, and it makes sense, I don't know anything about Egyptian archaeology, but I will say the big downfall of all that complex civilization archaeology, to my understanding, and I don't know it well, is that they kind of take a lot of things for granted, and they don't, for instance, radiocarbon date things like we do, because they have like hieroglyphics and writing and really nuanced understandings of how pottery changes through time and architecture changes through time. So they don't always put a ton of emphasis on like the radiometric dating techniques that we do in New World archaeology. So when I heard that theory initially, I was like, well, did they ever date the Sphinx? like did they find like, a piece of charcoal underneath it? Whatever. Like, I don't even know how they did it, but I looked into it, and basically the theory was that like the water erosion around the Sphinx is too advanced to have been created during the arid conditions of the Holocene. Therefore, it would have had to have been carved during the Ice Age, when it was more mesic in the Sahara, and have been eroding for 20,000 years as opposed to 5 or whatever, however old the Sphinx is. I can't remember. But then the rebuttal is that the Giza Plateau is a karstic landform. It's like limestone, and so there's actually all these paleokarst formations within the Giza Plateau, like naturally formed caverns within the Giza Plateau. And basically when they carved out the Sphinx out of bedrock, they hit some of that paleokarst, and it's basically just a remnant erosional feature of when that limestone plateau formed and then eroded over the millions of years since.
So there's karsts around the pyramids and stuff?
That's my understanding. Not like huge caverns, but a lot of those karst formations have like little tubes and stuff running through them.
Yeah. Huh. That's cool.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's as old as the Egyptologists say it is, or else.
That's kind of where I'm at. Like, I mean,
it is a pretty crazy thing, though, and I'm not opposed to the idea that it was created over like a lot longer time span than they think it was, or like created in phases and rejuvenated at different times and things like that. But I don't know. I don't know Egyptian archaeology.
I don't know anything about it either, really. But like the face, since it's so small, and they think like what Napoleon shot it or some shit. I've heard someone say that. I think it was a dog at first, because the proportions of like a dog snout versus a cat snout on that would make sense. And all that research I've been doing, like Anubis is like the oldest Egyptian god. Like there's dog statues all over, so probably that. And like whenever I've had pseudo people like message me about that, I'm like, well, I think it was a dog, and they're like, I haven't heard that before. It like kind of diffuses it a bit, but Yeah, the erosion thing, I got no idea. I'm not trying to do any. I'm not dabbling into that.
There's a couple peer-reviewed papers about it, and I read them.
Yeah.
There's not that much literature on it though, but I know like the Graham Hancocks have really latched onto that idea.
I watched his Rogans and stuff. I think he's a smart dude for sure and knows what he's talking about, but I don't know if he's ever like stuck a shovel in the ground, which kind of like irks me a bit. But I mean, most of archaeology is reading anyway. So
That's what irks me too. Well, what irks me about it, I don't really give a shit what he says. Like, people are going to believe what they want to believe. And I differ from a lot of archaeologists in that regard.
yeah,
But what irks me is he like creates this kind of like conspiratorial dichotomy between like him and the establishment or whatever. I think it's a complete straw man. It's also counterproductive because if he didn't have archaeologists out there digging up shit, then he wouldn't have any material to create his stories out of. I was like, why don't you use all the money you're getting off your books and fund some digs?
yeah. And like he just kind of vilifies archaeologists in a way, and he's like the dogma and yada yada, and like they don't want to dig this. And like major point that he said was like there's the Amazon, and like no one's looking there. Like there's massive structures down there, and no archaeologists looking at it. It's like, go take your fucking little tiny glasses ass in there and put the machete and go find it yourself then. Like, no one wants to fund that. And it just irks me. And then everyone's like, yeah, fuck archaeologists, like on the internet. I don't know, dude. If you see this, Graham, sorry, but you got cool glasses, I guess. I'll go with you. Anyway, I got way off topic. Your research was hide scraping and like how people need a microclimate on their body to exist and things like that. Can you make me sound smarter in that question and talk
Sure.
about it?
When I was getting my graduate degree, or my master's degree, I should say, that was really kind of the beginnings of when we were starting to get reports out of the Rocky Mountains that we had Folsom houses at the Mountaineer site and at the Barker Gold site. And at the time, this is like late 2000s, that's kind of revelatory because nobody had ever found a Ice Age house, or at least in North America. And it was kind of like
That's Folsom, right?
Folsom, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and like Todd and Nicole at Barger spent all this time and effort kind of just establishing the notion that this was indeed a house. They did the same thing at Mountaineer, meticulously mapping all the rocks and actually like just mapping, like excavating and mapping places where there weren't artifacts to get like a baseline idea of what the rocks look like. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, of course they had goddamn houses. Like, it's the Rocky Mountains during the Ice Age. It was really cold. Why do we think that they didn't have houses? I mean, but they did. They had to go to all this effort to kind of prove it, and because it was kind of the first time this had been found. And so I kind of just chased that logic down the rabbit hole, and I was like, well, you also probably had to have clothing. And to make clothing, you got to have a lot of stone tools. You got to have a lot of other things. And eventually just ended up concluding that, a large majority of the toolkits of hunter-gatherers should be devoted to processing hide and sewing clothing. It should basically be freestanding houses in more or less every hunter-gatherer campsite in the Rocky Mountains and High Plains. And it's really just a matter of coming up with some theory for understanding the variation in stone tool assemblages and stone tool distributions and sites to understand how people kept warm when it was cold and cool when it was warm.
Yeah. And I think a short synopsis of one of your papers, at least, was like the further north you go in altitude or in latitude, the more hide scrapers you find. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less. It was the two main tools you need for processing hide and sewing are end scrapers and some kind of perforating tool. End scrapers are used to scrape hide to make like a really stiff animal hide into something that's super pliable and that you can actually wrap around yourself. And then you need perforating tools because things like bone needles or awls, although those were also used, they don't often survive in the record. So the stone perforator is used to prepare a seam to sew because those bone tools will just break in half if you try to perforate a lot of leather with them themselves. And as you get On the southern plains, at least in the Folsom record, there's relatively few inscrapers and perforators, and then they get more abundant the further north you go in the Folsom world. So up in places like Montana, North Dakota, you get a ton of those things. So really simple idea, but it seems to pan out in the real world. And basically that this need to produce warm clothing and warm housing fundamentally structures the underlying characteristics of stone toolkits.
Yeah. Fascinating. So what do you think daily life was like out here?
During the Pleistocene?
Yeah. Because I imagine you're spending a lot of time repairing clothing.
Yes. You spend a lot of time, scraping hide. Like at least in the ethnohistoric record, one hide would take like 40 hours to finish.
Damn.
So a lot of time scraping hide, a lot of time perforating and sewing hide probably. The thought is that these little tiny bone needles we find in the Pleistocene in Wyoming, when I say really tiny, I mean like 3 millimeters wide, like extraordinarily tiny bone needles that we don't really find in the record after the Pleistocene in Wyoming at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it was thought they were so small because you were sewing really complex, like parka-like garments that have hoods and fringe, probably with like fur-bearing pelts,
and like where the shoulder attaches to the arm and stuff, like all that.
Yeah, so if there's a big difference between creating like a frock that's just kind of like I guess you call it like a drug rug, like something like that, which a lot of people were wearing on the plains in the historic record, just loose fitting kind of clothing like that, a poncho.
Yeah.
And then creating things that actually have sleeves where you have to sew it tight to your body. And of course, the tighter you can sew your clothing to your body, the more efficient it is, the less air that you lose.
That microclimate stays on you.
So the microclimate stays like right next to your body, and it makes a huge difference. You have to have that stuff to live in really cold environments, or else you can eat all the calories in the world, but you're just going to lose them through shivering and other sorts of physiological thermogenesis.
I didn't really think about shivering burning calories.
Yeah, that's what shivering is. Shivering is basically your body involuntarily shaking itself to create friction to keep yourself warm.
Is that why Joe Rogan sits in an ice tank all the time?
I mean, so there is really good evidence to suggest that if you routinely expose yourself to cold temperatures and force your metabolism to react to that, it keeps your metabolically active fat, this is called brown adipose tissue, it keeps it from atrophying into old age. So old people get cold really easily because their metabolically active fat basically just disappears with age because they don't keep it active. They spend their entire lives in climate controlled environments. But in the few studies that have been done on like construction workers in Scandinavia, when they've done necropsies on those bodies, they still have metabolically active fat in their bodies in large abundances because they spent their entire lives outdoors, adapting to that environment. Anyway, that fat burns a lot of calories, so it pays to keep it on. But if you don't have clothing to insulate yourself to begin with, you're just going to lose all your calories from your physiological adaptations to keeping warm. So you can eat butter all day long and it won't matter. You're still gonna get hypothermia. So clothing is extremely important, and we know, or at least from modeling I did, we know that exactly basically where you need to start wearing clothing at what temperature.
So not Los Angeles, really?
No, Los Angeles is south of what I call the naked and homeless contour.
Well, that checks out for today.
It does, as is Florida, as is Brownville, Texas, down far. Yeah, so basically anything south of like Southern California, Southern Texas, basically the entire appendage of Florida, that's all south of the naked and homeless line. You can be naked and homeless there and survive all year round, theoretically.
So yeah, Florida checks out for that. How much time do you think people are spending hunting, and like what's your opinion on like that division of labor? Because I guess the reason I bring this up is when I posted the video of me saying like the napper and I used he, people were like some anthropologists do comment, and they're like, actually it was like women doing a lot of like the stone tool work for that, but also like You had mentioned that LaPrele might have been like, you know, a school. Like you come here to learn how to make channel flakes and shit. And like, I don't know. You want to speak to that?
Well, day to day. So we're going to talk gender division of labor
Yeah, let's do it.
in the Pleistocene household. I don't know. I mean, I think, and I think Todd thinks this too. He's the one that studied the interior of households a lot more than I have and thought about it a lot more than I have. But it makes sense to me that there would be, it would be efficient at the household level to divide out flint knapping tasks in some way. So that one person wasn't constantly, or like one sex wasn't constantly getting pulled into flint knapping tasks. Like, oh shit, I broke my hide scraper. I gotta wait till the old man gets back, or else I'm helpless.
Can't do it.
So I think it's generally thought that like household stone tools, which are the vast majority of stone tools, by the way, were probably flint knapped by women that were basically caretakers of the household. This is based on ethnographic analogy.
Yeah.
So maybe household division of labor was fundamentally different 13,000 years ago. I doubt it. So things like in scrapers and like basically the vast majority of stone tools and sites, in scrapers, street touch flakes, all the stuff that you find in domestic contexts was probably flint knapped by women.
Yeah.
And bifaces or weaponry, or what eventually became weaponry, might have been the domain of males in the household. I think that's probably the most sound way to look at it right now, at least with regard to the evidence we have. But
yeah,
I think certainly, globally, when we look at who processes hides, who sews clothing, it's almost always women in hunter-gatherer context.
Yeah,
because that work is being done in the household. It pretty much has to be done in the household because it has to be kind of a climate-controlled environment. And then weaponry is kind of the domain of men. This is obviously not 100% either way.
Right.
There were probably women that hunted. There were probably men that process hides. But in general, it seems to be the case. That's how I think about it.
Huh.
And you often do find, I think, should look back at Todd's book, some division between bifacial and unifacial reduction within households.
Versus, like, in terms of gender?
They're just spatially segregated activities.
Huh.
So you sit down and nap a biface, you're going to want like your own space to do that because it makes a huge mess, right? It creates a ton of waste.
Yeah.
But unifacial retouch creates comparatively less waste. You're just basically knocking off tiny flakes.
Yeah. That's cool. Never really thought about that. I'm going to throw a video of that up right now. I was on another podcast recently. I think it was my last video. Oh, yeah. So I did the one with Bob, and then I posted one I did with Matilda Siebricht, I think is actually her name. It was her podcast, but I put it on there. Talked about stone tools and stuff. With the division of labor, it's interesting because, like, women are doing a lot of work at camp, right? Like trapping, sewing hides, tanning hides, things like that, at least in, like, ethnographic stuff I've
Tending
read.
fire.
And then tending fire, cooking. I mean, guys probably did a lot. There was probably a guy barbecuing who wore shorts and was like, "Hey, kid," and then
the Pleistocene equivalent of New Balance on.
Yeah, just making dad jokes all day. Yeah, but like the men are out hunting, and I this is in Bob's book. Like gathering and domestic activities are safer for children, which is why men. Or like women usually do the child rearing and men are usually hunting, because you can go away for like 2 to 3 weeks on a foray and like do that, and like you can't really bring a 5-year-old with you doing that. But the cool aspect of that too is like the guys would probably come back home and they're like, and it's empty-handed, and they're like, "What the fuck, Jim?" And like he didn't have like we just been here for 3 weeks slaving, and like you didn't bring anything. So like hunting wasn't necessarily the only form of food to me.
Oh, for sure. I mean, but that's kind of the classic argument is that women stayed around houses because of child rearing activities. So there's a couple reasons for that. One, you engage in interruptible tasks other than tasks that can't be interrupted. So when you're gathering stuff or you're tending fire or you're cooking, those are all things you can kind of set down for a second, nurse a child, put a child to sleep, whatever. Mm-hmm. If you took that same child hunting and you were like crouched down in a hunting blind stalking a deer and the child starts screaming,
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. It really impacts your success. So there's that aspect of it. There's also the aspect of just lugging. Like hunting's an extraordinarily mobile activity. You have to move a ton. You have to walk a ton. And if you're carrying a child with you doing that, it's going to really decrease your chances of success. That's the classic example of why that division of labor basically emerged in human societies.
Mm-hmm.
But right, the really the crucial work of a hunter-gatherer was that reliable maintenance of a household and a camp that kept a fire going, kept a steady kind of baseline intake of calories coming into camp. But you still need meat and fat to survive.
Mm-hmm.
More or less, you have to as a hunter-gatherer in most places in the world. And so even though hunting is like really risky and often fails, when it does succeed, that's a really important aspect of your diet that you really can't replace with, you know, a few rabbits and tubers. You just really can't. You have to have, especially for the winter months when vegetable products or floral products aren't really available. Things like meat and fat you can actually dry or you know, mix up into pemmican or whatever and keep over stores of it over the winter. So I don't know. That division of labor makes sense from our evolutionary history, and it would be fundamentally weird if there was a hunter-gatherer society in which it was flopped. I think that would be, frankly, a complete failure of a hunter-gatherer society. You would have the people that were least equipped to hunt, not physically or anything, but just in terms of you have to rear children, you have to breastfeed, you have to do all this stuff. You can't replace that with a male out hunting and your baby crying while you're trying to shoot an arrow or and then have men who are notoriously lazy at camp trying to tend the fire and do really detailed dexterous tasks like sew, which we're also notoriously bad at because our fingers are fat.
I tried to sew I had no idea what I was doing, and it just, like, someone commented, "What is that? Just a tarp you sewed together?" And I was like, "I tried, please."
No, it's hard. It was great. Nicole Wagisback made me sew a piece of clothing for my dissertation.
Oh yeah,
like qualifying exams or whatever. It was the first time I'd ever sewed in my life.
How'd it go?
It was bad. I mean, it was super hard, and just in the dexterity aspect of it is really what got me, because my fingers were just too big, and also just don't have a ton of patience for tasks like that or attention to detail. And I'll start like, you know, doing really well, and then just like, whatever, I'll just finish it.
Yeah, and like I noticed when I sew too, like even if I have to sew, like my pants finally ripped after 3 years, like I'll do like the one stitch, because I took home ec in middle school, like they made us do it in New York, and like then you took shop the rest of the year to divide the labor, and like I'd do the same sewing pattern, but then I would get like bored, so I would just like tie a knot at some point and then it just looked like shit, and it was a pillow that said the 76ers on it, because I was really an Allen Iverson at the time. Then we cooked bacon the next week. But yeah, sewing's not something I'm good at. But yeah, that girl who posted that, like, a bow needle is so integral to life at the time. Never really thought about it like that until she said it. And like, it was sick at LaPrele just seeing all that stuff just come out of the ground constantly.
Yeah, so one aspect I stumbled across right in my disc that I hadn't really thought of before is that you more or less have to use bone needles inside climate-controlled spaces, especially in cold regions, because of the dexterity aspect of it. And there's been research on this about how cold weather impacts your dexterity, your how well you can work your fingers. And when you're working with something that tiny, you basically can't lose any dexterity in your fingers, or you just can't perform that task anymore.
Mm.
And so in my mind, anytime you find bone needle in an archaeological site, that's from the inside of a house. It almost has to be.
That's fucking astute.
Because well, one, the dexterity aspect of it, but also if you're trying to sew an intricate garment outside where it's windy and you're exposed to the elements and stuff, it's not going to go very well. So I kind of think any place where there's been bone needles found in Pleistocene archaeological sites are probably inside a house.
That tracks, because like napping at LaPrele all summer, like my bones didn't hurt too much, but also like my hands are getting exercise every day troweling. But like me, Craig, and Jacob were napping the other day, And like I noticed when I went to bed, like the bones in my hand like straight up hurt because you're shoving all that percussion into it, and it was
Mm-hmm.
cold, so that might totally affect it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that just the basic reality of maintaining dexterity in your fingers can probably explain a lot of the archaeological record.
Yeah.
Like where you do certain things and where you do other things.
What did it look like in Mongolia? Like, because they were all reindeer herders, but I'm assuming there's other aspects of life inside the hut, or what is it? The yurt,
Gear
gear. That's it.
or orts or
Orts.
ortsen
That's it.
gear.
Orts. Okay, that's a cool one.
I think gear means house, and like ortsen gear means some other kind of house. Anyway,
Hold it. Okay,
um,
so Orts and Einsatzgruppen.
I use some of the Mongolia data from that project in my diss, and what I wanted to know is like the influence of ambient temperature on how much stuff people do outside versus inside. So it's a really simple analysis. We analyzed all these photos, these time lapse photos from this project taken of camp, and we basically just said what percentage of photos has people doing stuff outside their structure at different temperature ranges, from like negative 40 degrees, I think was the coldest temperature
Jesus
it's hard
Christ.
register, all the way up to maybe like 80 degrees is the warmest we got. And it's a beautiful relationship. The colder it gets, the more people go inside to do stuff. Not surprising.
Right.
Well, what they're doing inside was, well, at least the things I observed, where I did watch people sew, and I watched people scrape hide inside. Watch people.
Were they dudes?
Nope.
Hmm.
Well, dudes did do stuff inside, but it was like repair, firearm. They did some like carving, like handicrafts, carving little figurines out of bone and antler, or carving wooden bowls.
Yeah.
And then the stuff that's kind of bound to the inside, which is like tending a fire, cooking, uh, processing meat, that kind of thing.
And there were some dogs out there too that I remember you telling me about.
Yeah, a ton of dogs.
And they ate people's shit.
They eat people's feces. A lot.
Yeah. Do you wanna elaborate on that, or?
Sure. I mean, it got to the point where like, so you kind of like leave your house to go take your daily deuce and kind of sneak off to the edge of camp or whatever, and the dogs would figure out like the time of day that would happen. They'd just be sitting there behind a log, just waiting. And they'd kind of like, you'd go off into the woods and you just see these little ears kind of like stalking you, like hiding behind logs.
Just waiting to eat your
just
shit.
waiting. And as soon as you left, they'd come up and chow down. And if you buried it, they would dig it up.
That's fascinating, dude.
And it was that's probably a major source of calories for them. I don't know.
Yeah. I was reading that. Well, I guess one anecdote. I'll probably cut this out, but my old house over there, we only had one bathroom, and Craig was in it, and I really had to take a shit. So I went out back, and it was like a snowstorm, and I just did my thing. And like Strider immediately ran out and tried to eat it, and I'd like grab him by the collar and bring him inside. Like, 'cause one, it was embarrassing that I was just shitting outside in like the middle of winter in Wyoming, but I really had to go. And then two, my dog almost ate it, and I had to tell the story. I think this is the first time I've publicly admitted it, so that's cool. But yeah, it does smell interesting, I guess. So like and it steams, so they can probably see that, like the color of the steam and the smell, and it's enticing.
I mean, it made me think, I don't know. There's a lot of theories about why dogs are domesticated, but I don't know why that shouldn't be one of them.
Just
turning people shit into dog shit.
Circle of life, dude. Yeah, and on the plains, I forget which I want to say it was the Arikara, maybe. They would use puppies to like lick babies' assholes to clean them.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It really is. So, like, the same dog comes and licks your foot later, and you're like, oh, nice. Yeah.
Well, at least in Mongolia, like, you do not let dogs lick you. They're not.
It's not.
And they're not allowed in the houses. Like, it's not that kind of dog.
Yeah.
Or at least ours would. They didn't let the puppy in the house because there was a puppy in camp, and it was just kind of too young to be out and about all the time.
Frozen. And And there's wolves out there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And though they were livestock guardian dogs, essentially, like protecting the herd, or just alerting dogs.
Kind of. Yeah. They're really good watchdogs. They're really good at finding animals in general.
So
They didn't really use them to pack or anything. They're just kind of around.
Yeah.
Eating shit. And
a lot of people can say the same. You know?
Cleaning up camp. I mean, they would haul trash and like scrap bones and stuff off to the edge of camp, and so keep it kind of clean.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't have like a very well defined function in my mind, I guess.
Yeah.
They're good at finding animals. They're good at. I think they definitely did serve a purpose in keeping wolves away, or at least making wolves a little more wary of attacking the deer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it gives a little reassurance that nobody's sneaking up on your camp, either person or wild animal.
Mm-hmm. And it makes me wonder. I know Todd and I go back and forth on this, and O'Brien as well, and Angela. But like, did Clovis people have dogs? The timeline lines up for me, but there's no evidence yet. But even in the Paleolithic in Europe, like if you're cutting open a giant mammoth and you have all that like stank happening, like especially here where it was like the savannah essentially, or Serengeti with all these predators and things and coyotes, wolves, bears, dire wolves, it's gonna attract something. So like having dogs would significantly affect that, like keep them away. But I guess you could also do it with like just many torches around camp and keep, I don't know.
So yeah, in terms of the looking for dogs in the archaeological record, looking for evidence of it, the thing that struck me about the Mongolia data and like just what we saw there was dogs don't occupy the same places as people in any of these camps. They have their own little niche. So in an archaeological context, if you're looking for the remains of people, stone tools and stuff, you're not going to find any evidence for dogs intermixed with that.
No.
Because dogs, as soon as they get in the way of a person, they get kicked.
Right.
And they need to get out of the way. So at least in our camps, they had their own little area, right?
But you can't tell your dog no.
Yeah, right.
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, they don't, in a Paleolithic context, yeah, you definitely, your dog's not like sleeping with you probably very much unless you're super cold. They have their own little space. And that little space, people aren't doing anything out of it. It's not like people avoid it because the dog's there. It's because dogs find the one spot where they can be out of the way and they won't get kicked.
Right.
Or they sneak off to the edge of camp with like scraps of food and stuff and chew on it way away from where everything else is because they want to guard it and keep it secret. So if you want to find evidence for dogs in a Pleistocene campsite, you should probably just start digging holes like out in the middle of nowhere away from the campsite.
Just cross your fingers.
And just cross your fingers that you're going to find like a rib that's been gnawed on or something like that, because you're certainly not going to find any evidence for it inside of a house.
It's funny you say that too, because like looking at all that LaPrele footage the other day, Callie always sat right outside the weather port, like guarding it, I guess in the shade too. She'd sit under the table sometimes. Brady's dog curled up next to him sometimes because she had some anxiety issues, but like most of the dogs like would find a spot not occupied by a person and sit there, especially if it was in the shade. But they didn't stay too far away from us at the same time, which I thought was interesting. And then burrito break, they would all kind of gather. But yeah.
Yeah, they at least in Mongolia, they did have a little place to curl up kind of in the center of camp, but it was like next to a tree that had a bunch of roots and stuff, so like nobody was working there.
Oh, so like not even that close to people. Like
no, and most of the time they were just kind of like out in the woods doing stuff.
I want to move on to another topic that I've always wanted to ask somebody, and I'll end it with my other question. But like, I read a paper about hunter-gatherer shaming, because the reason this came up, I watched the Solutrean Hypothesis documentary. And they said that, like, in the dramatization of it, these two hunters got, like, kicked out of camp for murdering or something, and then they, like, sailed across the ice and, went to, the Chesapeake Bay and had some old bay.
I've never seen that.
No, it's it's a doozy. You check it out. I mean, it's cool, like, It was a high production one, and like the clothing and all the things they were wearing and stuff was cool. But hunter gatherer shaming is a thing, and like when there has to be some level of group cohesion and like an agreed upon social status and norm. So people that go out of that norm kind of have to be exiled for a bit and like leave. And like it's just crazy to me how all this cancel culture stuff is like so big right now, and like people are ostracized, and well, I guess with Kanye going on, you cut his thing off, and or not his dick, but you cut off his social media. And it's kind of the same thing, but on like a mass society thing. And some people, it's like okay, and they've kind of come back a bit. Other people, it's like, yeah, you fucked up, and you're like out of here. But like, do you like chimps do that kind of thing? Wolves do that kind of thing? Do you see anything? I don't know who to talk to about this, but you. So
I've never thought about it. I mean, every society has to have a means of removing people from it that they deem antisocial or that's like violated the norms of that society.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, modern societies have done that through like a highly evolved judiciary. And it's basically, a trial with lawyers and a judge and a jury. It's a little different in every country, but most first world countries have some version of that, so that it's not just that process isn't arbitrary and capricious in like legal terms. It's not like you can unfairly cast somebody out of society like you could in the past. I think traditionally the forms it would take, if you did something bad and everybody agreed it was bad, you either got killed or you got banished. That's it. Pretty simple. I guess in a way, cancel culture, whatever that is, I guess in my mind, it just boils down to it's targeted harassment by groups of people against individuals.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. But now that we're in an online community, there's really no real community doing that. And you can build consensus from like a really disparate group of people from on a global scale. And you're bound to find at least 100 people that agree with you that person's bad. And you can all bound together and do that. So it's kind of a return to a little bit more of a primitive system, but it's on a global scale. So you can amass this, you can kind of amass consensus on the internet through like an internet quote unquote community that doesn't actually exist in real life, but you can get enough of kind of a bandwagon together to really force people out and harass people enough to really fuck up their lives.
Yeah.
I think that's basically what it is. It's a very, in my mind, it's a very primitive mindset to do that. Everybody should have the right to have like a fair hearing and have a right to state their piece and all that stuff. But it is really innate part of our cognition probably to do that.
Yeah.
To build a coalition of people that agree with you and shit on one other person that you all don't like. It's probably a pretty natural instinct.
Right. And yeah, you can't just like find somebody and group kick the shit out of them anymore. So like
but that's not true. That's the naturalistic fallacy though, right? Like just because it's a natural mindset doesn't mean it's right. And so like in a liberal democracy, we use the judiciary to moderate these things, and we still should, because it's just not a tenable or sustainable system to really do that in a modern society.
What do you think about social media in general, about just like anthropologically?
I think it's fun. I love the chaos of it.
You love a good meme. I know that.
I love memes. And I just love the general chaos that it's thrown into social discourse. Like it's there is no structure to social discourse anymore. It's basically whoever's the loudest puts together the most entertaining narrative wins. Mm-hmm. And part of me loves that chaos. It's like, it's amazing. It's a complete restructuring of how we talk about issues.
Yeah.
How we talk about things. On the other hand, chaos isn't necessarily all that good for a society function. So I'm not really sure how that's going to shake out in the end.
Right.
Like now that there is no real overarching narrative to our culture, where does that take us? I don't know.
What do you mean by that? Like no like cultural king?
Well, there's no
it's not a theocracy, I guess.
There's always been really strict parameters around how we talk about things in our society. call it the Overton window, right? The Overton window is kind of like the window around which we bracket acceptable discourse. That no longer exists anymore. And now you have like overt white supremacists arguing with like you know, what they call Black Israelites, whatever. Like
Yeah.
you have like
Yeah, I've seen that.
you have like these amazing fringe groups going at each other like in a public forum, and like Tom Brokaw is just like back here like, in my day we used to have acceptable discourse and I used to talk about it every night on the news. That just doesn't exist anymore,
right,
anywhere. And it's not just an American thing, it's like it's everywhere. And so now that no longer exists, that like there's no longer parameters around how we talk about things and in turn how we create culture, I don't really know where that leads. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where it goes. I mean, I think eventually we're going to have to settle on some sort of meta narrative that like describes our culture, because the old ones have more or less died, about, you know, all the tropes about the American dream and all that stuff. But I don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of people now are turning to communism because of that. They're like all these like Zoomer tankies online are like, well, there's something we can hang our hat on. Just a firm economic theory, and which is stupid.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Xi Jinping said to Biden that like democracy or technology is moving too fast for democracy. Like one person has to make the decisions at this point, because it's like with our election and shit, it got crazy. And obviously, I don't want a communist states of the United States. I welcome the CCP at any point to come take Alabama, but like, like he has an interesting point, because like with all that stuff, like who, like there's just what's right. Like there's so many like fake news and all that stuff, you know?
I mean, yeah, he has a point. I personally am still a big proponent of liberal democracy. I think it's the greatest system the world's ever created. It's created more affluence and human prosperity than any system that's ever existed on Earth.
That's fair.
That being said, it's cumbersome, it's bureaucratic, it's slow to respond to technological change. Whenever you want to decide something, you have to build consensus from like basically the ground up. And I don't know if it's responsive enough to the pace at which technology is changing. And that's why we're also freaked out about election results and people rigging elections and all that stuff. Is one of the reasons. But yeah, I don't know where it goes from here. I mean, I still have a lot of hope for liberal democracy. It's just that the narratives we use to justify its existence have completely fallen apart, and I don't know where the narrative goes next.
Yeah, man. I mean, 2020 got wild, but like I did notice once that, was it Dogface 420, the guy who drank the cranberry juice with the Fleetwood Mac playing. Yeah, like it went kind of uphill from there. Like things got better. So like little things like that, just like people latch onto it and they're like, oh, finally something nice.
That's a little sad though. It's like, oh, finally a moment of purity. Like I guess then it's gone 2 days later.
And then you turn on the news and it's just Kharkiv's getting bombed again. You're like, oh fuck. But
yeah.
Oh no, it's tough stuff. Where was I? Yeah, so on the other podcast I was on, it's the last one I posted on YouTube. I like kind of came up with it while we were talking, but like it's very interesting to me that one, you can see so many aspects of like world culture through a tiny little screen on your phone. Like I would never know what a poor farmer's life is like in rural China who makes like bamboo crafts for like a living, you know? Like I was like, oh shit, that's cool. And you see all this stuff. I can see how that makes people depressed because they're seeing like, you know, really rich kids in California have everything that they want and take selfies and shit. But I found all that interesting, that you view all that mostly through a biface sized tool that has like sits in your pocket. And I called it like a social media biface, but like we're still inherently the same species, but there's just so much more shit we have to deal with now. And it's just wild to me.
Yeah. I mean, the tactile dimension of it's a good point. I think that's why some people are so resistant to use things like those AR glasses.
Right.
Like I heard Zuckerberg talk about that recently, trying to sell people on Meta
Welcome to the metaverse.
about like wearing these AR glasses and you're like interacting with your coworkers through them and stuff. I'm like, I don't know if that's gonna, maybe it will. Maybe I've been wrong about this stuff a lot, but like to me, the tactile dimension of life is still super important to people, and people feel super vacuous and unfulfilled if you don't have that. So yeah, well, you're right. Like a phone, a bi-face phone or whatever.
Yeah.
That's why we haven't made. We still want to hold something in our hand and feel like we have control of it, as opposed to like it overtaking our face.
Yeah.
Like being embedded in our
yeah.
in our view in our visual field.
Because it went from like that giant 80s cell phone to like down to like a Motorola Razr, and then it went way back up.
Yeah.
And I saw someone correlate that with like the availability of online porn. So like, you want a bigger screen, but like it's interesting to me that it has always stayed. And then you get into like intelligent design and like bananas are made for your hands and shit. But like it is interesting because I do like a thing I can hold in my phone or in my hand that's in my pocket. And I even got the watch because like I spend way too much time on my phone, especially with my job now. And like I reduce my time on my phone because I can just read the text on there. But I still like sometimes like if I don't have my phone near me, it's like oh shit, like what if my parents call, my brother's dead or something? Like I need that near me, or I gotta look for something. But like in the past, you needed a biface size tool, you needed probably a fire kit, and you needed some kind of like water container. And like I carry my Nalgene around with me all the time.
So you said you started this out by saying, we're exposed to like everything in the world to the thing in our hand, and it's the size of the biface. The funniest thing I've seen said about that, I think it was just a tweet. I should have screenshotted it, but I didn't. It was like, I've seen more beautiful women in the last 15 seconds on my phone than my great-grandfather saw in his entire life. Or like than my ancestors saw in their entire lives.
That's super true,
And
man.
it was like the saddest and most true commentary on, especially like being a dude on social media, that when you're just bombarded by,
I can't get away from it.
you're just bombarded by chicks in lingerie all day on social media.
Yeah.
And it's like it's just such a funny commentary on where we're at with that stuff.
Like I tell myself not to like it, so therefore I don't see more of it, but I still find myself like watch it once and then I don't realize that it's looped again.
You don't have to watch it, buddy.
Well,
I know.
Yeah, I know. But like it's the first thing that pops up, and then it's someone foot napping, and I'm like, oh, nice. And then it's Hezbollah, and then I'm like, cool. It's like basically my page. But I guess through all that, and like we're in this crazy time, and I don't know how to tie this into keeping warm and hide scraping, but like, what?
I got a way too.
Okay.
Go for it.
My question was gonna be like, what's it mean to be human? And I'd love to know like, how you can combine all that.
All right. Well,
use your PhD.
kind of the cherry on top of what I wrote about in my diss, and I haven't really written about this anymore, but is basically an argument that the necessity to keep warm in freestanding structures in Eurasia led to the adoption of nuclear family units in the hominid lineage. So, by necessity, when we started moving out on the plains of Russia into Siberia, places where there weren't caves anymore, we had to start living in freestanding structures. And there's no evidence that we had freestanding structures prior to around 40,000 years ago. No evidence that Neanderthals had freestanding structures. There's really no evidence in Africa that people were using freestanding structures in Africa during the Stone Age, to my knowledge. So that was really an invention of modern humans as we moved into the high latitudes of Eurasia, out onto places without rock shelters or caves. When you start building freestanding structures, there's obviously just basic engineering constraints about those structures. You can't build a structure using Stone Age technology that houses, say, a band of 50 people at once. You can't do that. It would take, it would take massive engineering feat to do that even today.
Right.
So
like the Iroquois.
So by necessity, you started making freestanding structures out of lodge poles, hides, brush, whatever, and they can only be so big, probably 5 to 6 meters tops. What that forced human societies to do was partition their bands into logical units of people to occupy each of those freestanding structures. And the most logical way to do that is by your mate and the children you have with that mate, or one of your mates and some of your children that you had with them, or maybe two of your mates, whatever. And in my mind, doing that over and over again, building these freestanding structures, living with the same people over and over again, led to the creation of this social construct that we now call the nuclear family. Basically, groups of immediate family living together under the same house, helping each other with chores, dividing out, home economic tasks, that kind of thing. So, in the end, thermoregulation, I think, might have helped contribute to the origins of what became complex society, where you have nuclear family units. You then have the ability to scale up to, have coalitions of multiple nuclear family units, which then allows you to scale up into something that we might start calling a tribe, and a chiefdom, and so on. But when everybody's their own terminal unit, their own agent in this complex system, you can't really build from that, because your alliances are constantly shifting. You're constantly you probably have multiple mates and you have children for multiple people. There's no guarantee that you're going to provision any of them consistently, and so there's no real way to build up complex society out of that, or at least there wasn't in the Stone Age. So I do think that thermoregulation ultimately may have had something to do with the origins of complex society, and the approximate view on that, at least in the Upper Paleolithic, is that as soon as we start seeing houses, we start seeing things like art, and we start seeing complex burial customs, and we start seeing all this other form of complexity that some people have argued way in the past that it was a cognitive thing. I don't think it was a cognitive thing. I think it was basically a leap in social complexity, where we started living in nuclear families and freestanding houses.
Yeah. Hell yeah. And that's not just specific to Europe. That's in the Middle East at the time, and Asia and stuff too, right?
It emerges more or less contemporaneously between Lake Baikal region of East Asia, and also the Central Russian plain, around Kashtinki, and I think that's in Russia or Ukraine. I can't remember which one.
Well, who knows now?
and then basically, once housing becomes a crucial part of the hominin society, or modern human society, then it spreads back to places where it's not necessary for thermoregulation necessarily. It's just necessary for society to function.
Yeah. That is really interesting. Never would have thought about that. If it's cold, most of your day kind of revolves around keeping warm. You got to stay by the fire. You got to people might make hot soup or eat ramen that day or something. Yeah, that is really interesting.
It does, and it really matters who you spend that day with. Are you spending it with whoever? And caves are interesting because caves are not all the same, right? They're all shaped differently. They're all different sizes. And so it doesn't really structure social interaction in a way that a house does. That has a predictable shape, a predictable size. You have to choose which house to be in.
Yeah.
When you're in a cave, you're basically just choosing I don't know,
I want the less
which wall to stand against.
Huh. That's cool, man.
So that's the big theory about how thermoregulation is basically the most important thing that's ever been studied ever in anthropology.
I'm just thinking a million things now, but you're right though. If you are stuck with your brother-in-law in one tent that you just don't like, it's going to cause social issues and stuff like that. So your complexity socially changes a bunch. I mean, it's weird to define complex in some ways, but yeah,
freestanding houses would have fundamentally changed how your interpersonal social interactions.
Yeah.
And you can start keeping secrets for the first time too. You can hide stuff. You can have conversations that not everybody hears really easily. All sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and you can fuck without your kids hearing it in the middle of the night too. There's the kids' tent.
Yeah.
I can probably cut that out. But anyway, so to you, is keeping a microclimate tight to your body what it means to be human?
That's not what it means to be human. There's plenty of humans around
Sure.
before all this happened, right? It's just that it might have something to do with the origins of like social complexity,
Where we're at now.
right? I would say the interesting thing is though is that as the nuclear family basically dissolves, which has only recently really happened, we don't really, and there's a good case to be made that we don't really need that to maintain social order anymore. That we all can be kind of autonomous agents that can ally with whoever we want in the world through this global network
Yeah.
and still maintain some sense of social cohesion. My fear is that those nuclear family structures have been in the hominin lineage so long that there's a lot of things that depend on that construct, that social construct, that we don't really realize and that we take for granted.
Especially like raising a child's like psychology.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
especially embedded deep in our brain stems. And I just don't think we know. I don't think we know what would happen if like we basically got rid of that construct, which is, the commies wanted to do that. That was like an overt goal of communism, was to break down traditional family structures, and so that everybody is their own kind of social producer in the society, and so you don't have these illogical ties to family. You have only a tie to the state. And I'm afraid that runs counter to human nature. I just don't know if like our brains can cope with that.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Cool. I appreciate you being on. This was a fun one. I didn't really have a plan, so we were just talking.
Yeah, one right.
Yeah. Do you with all the technical
Started with bone
difficulties.
needles, ended on communism.
I mean, that's how things should go. I got my guitar. Do you want to play us out? But
No, I don't think I want to do
that. All right. Well, on that note, we're gonna go. All right. I'll see you.